Peace, everyone, and welcome to another Sabbath Insight. Of course, I'm Chief Yuya, Chief Jugna of the ANU Nation. And in this segment, I wanted to deal with the concept with you of the true self versus the false self. As you see by the title, you, right? Really getting to who and what you be or is. It brings me to the 2009 movie Avatar. There was a phrase that they said a lot in that film, which was translated as "I see you," and I think that's an important point to make a lot of times to people. Sometimes you have people who play in your face; they don't think you see them. Sometimes you have people who need to be reminded of their own value and their own placement, and seeing them is important. In that movie, the Avatar, the Na'vi, they didn't greet each other by like saying greetings or peace or hello, but it was Welangati Kamaye. And that was translated as to I see you, Welangati Kamaye. Not necessarily meaning like I see your face, I see your being, I see your essence, I see your soul. you know these are important things. When you see yourself or when you see another, or when that phrase, even I see you, is spoken, but not necessarily in a way that your average mortal would use that speech, but it's an etheric sort of recognition. It's a declaration of a soul awareness, not necessarily eye contact. I see you with my physical eyes, but when you're saying, or when the Navi was saying, Welangati Kamae, it carries that weight of a forgotten ritual. I see the life in you. I see your current, your frequency. I see the imprint that's been put on you. I see the code that exists beneath your form. That's not a fictional concept. It's a fragment that James Cameron used that spoke to an older sort of gnosis. The Kemites had the Dogon had the concept. The Igbo called it Chi. The Akan referred to it as Kra. It's that hidden self. It's the self that's not performing, not necessarily the performative self, not the one that's trained for survival, or in fact, I should say trained by survival, or trained by trauma, or trained by social economy. A lot of times we define ourselves by that self, which is not you. That is a persona that has been trained by external factors. When we talk about the you, it's the primordial self. It's the one that was never born. And because that primordial self was never born, it can never die. Um, when you say, I see you, in reality, you're not saying, I see you, the personality, right? There's a soul that has been architect. To see the true self is to acknowledge its pre-incarnate memory, right? Before you even incarnated into this realm, you had a memory, you had a consciousness. So there are records of that consciousness that are etched into your ruach, and they're encrypted before you even had a form. Right. And that's an important thing to always seek to remember. Remembering is everything, because there's even a crisis that sort of lies in that. And that's that few people have ever met themselves. Few people can even stand the gaze of their own essence. Many people that I have encountered in life, I haven't met everyone in the world, but many people cling to the mask. They cling to their avatar. And so in doing that, they trade the eternal for what's more efficient to them, and at the time. And that's when war begins, and the war becomes the you versus the you that you agreed to forget. You see. Um so in this insight, where I'm sort of speaking about the you, it's not necessarily an encouragement for the mask. It's not for the wounded persona. It's for the one that lies behind the eyes, if you will. The watcher that exists within, you know. And as we go forward, it's up to you. You have to decide: are you going to remain as the echo of yourself, or are you going to reemerge as the original voice? You know, um, it may be a rough thing. I know some will tune out on this particular segment because they are so deeply invested in their mask. They use wounds and offense, to maintain the mask. The false self, always understand your false self is not a mistake. Your false self is a mechanism. It was necessary. Your false self was created to protect your spirit. But what happens is the spirit then becomes a prison when it's mistaken for the truth. When that false self is mistaken for the truth, you've now imprisoned your spirit. So from the moment you enter into this particular dimension, right, the world, it starts you off with a script. And pretty much just about almost never does that script ever reflect the covenant that's encoded inside of your kra. So the script begins to form the false self. It's not who you are or what you are in particular. It's who you become in order to be safe. It's who you become in order to be seen, or accepted, or who you even come in order to become invisible, depending on what things that your environment demanded of you, So there's a term in psychology that we use. It's called the persona, and it's a construct. It's a behavioral mask, if you will, and that behavioral mask is used to navigate social terrain. But from a deeper standpoint, that false self it's more than a coping mechanism. It's an energetic distortion. Like you're trying to watch a clear image. I guess it doesn't really happen anymore because all of the images are digital now. But there was a time when we had analog tuners on our TVs, and you would play with your antennas and your tuning to get a clear image. It would be distorted. You're looking at a shadow entity, when you're looking at that false self. And oftentimes it's built on trauma. It's built on unmet needs, and it's built on karmic detours. All right. I want you to pay close attention to that, because we keep our false self alive and active through those same exact things: trauma, unmet needs, and karmic distortions, or karmic detours, excuse me. And what ends up happening is that the false self begins to speak on your behalf without your consent. You know, when it speaks to the Almighty, whomever your Almighty is, it's using your breath, but it's not using your spirit. You see? So it begins to build relationships to reinforce its own validity, and it doesn't build relationships to reinforce your own assignment. You think about sometimes some of the relationships we choose in life. Sometimes we choose a relationship just to reinforce, and I'm saying intimate relationships. We are choosing intimate relationship just to reinforce the false self reality, you see. And the universe and the creator is bringing to us individuals who will reinforce the assignment And we don't want those. Maybe they're not exciting. Maybe they don't look a certain way. Maybe, again, they don't reinforce the false ideas that we want to have about ourselves. Oh, I'm this type of person, so I need to have this. I need someone like this. I need someone like that. I make this amount of money, so this person who's supposed to be for me has to make this amount of money. None of that speaks to aligning yourself with your divine assignment and who may come into your experience just to support that. So one of the signs that I can say, or some of the signs that may occur when you are living under the reign of your false self, is you feel drained around people you're close to. You adjust your voice, you adjust your posture, you even address your interest and your desires to avoid discomfort. Um, a lot of times you're praised, but you still feel unknown despite receiving all of that praise. And then you oscillate between hypervisibility and total withdrawal. you know, and you find yourself in a place where you can never achieve success that you can't, or rather, you will achieve success that you tend to not enjoy. So, because what happens is that when your false self is more dominant than your real self, then anything that you accomplish feels empty because they were achieved by an actor. They weren't achieved by your actual self. It's like playing a game and you're role playing, and the person in the game that you're role playing as, they win something, but you're like, okay, cool. But you didn't really win anything, Uh, in the Kabbalistic system, on the tree, we have the Sephiroth of Yesod. The false self tends to operate through Yesod. That's the foundation of the subconscious and social image, but it's cut off from the divine crown of Keter, when it's operating on, under the false self. In the Akan cosmology, it's the Kra that ends up being overridden by the ego's attempt to belong rather to obey. A very common situation. Again, when you look at that movie, Avatar, like I said, it came out in '09, you have the character Jake Sully, or Yakub Sully, and his initial presence in the Na'vi world, he came into the Na'vi's, environment as a spy. So he came in under performance. He was performing. He wasn't coming in for purpose, but the more he became his mask, the more he risked forgetting the vow that was encoded in his original body, the more he began to change and transform, which we see it towards the end and in part two, right? So the false self, it's seductive. It's meant to be seductive. It succeeds in systems that are built on performance. It gets applause and these sort of shrines and temples of capitalism and worship. In the church of social media, the false self thrives. That's his space, but the false self can never access the sacred. So it can't go into that space because it wasn't sent here. It was formed here, right? So the sacred is not here. So the things that were created here, the people that were created here and not necessarily created in the divine realm, can never access the sacred realm, you see. So even the personalities, the personas that you create for yourself in this world, they won't access the sacred world. So before we can even reclaim our true self, you gotta be able to name the imposter. Uh, what part of you was born from rejection? Think about things like that. What part of you was built to make other people comfortable? And then you have to ask yourself, are you ready to put those parts down? Are you ready to put that mask down? Even if it made you more likable to others, even if it made you more powerful in the world. Would you even be willing to put that mask down if you felt like it made you safe? You know, you can't resurrect a divine identity while still clinging to the corpse of your false one. You know, it's impossible. You know, this is why, like, a lot of times when I'm working with people, and some of you can attest to it, when you start that talk, well, Chief, let me tell you what kind of person I am. Chief, let me tell you how I'm not interested. Please don't stop. Don't try to put that spell in the middle of this space. It's time for us to go into a space where we elevate, but you want to hold on to something old, and then you'll usually come back with, well, this is all I know. This is all I've ever did. It ain't all you know. It's all you've wanted to hold on to. You know, so many different ways to hold on to the false self. You know, the true self is not something that you just become. You know, it's something that remains when all of the falsehood falls away. So you only really get to experience or see the true self when you're willing to let go of the false self. You know, wow, this is my zodiac, or I was born here, or I'm this race, or whatever. You know, the false self is formed in adaptation, and the true self is born of assignment. So it's your original template from the divine algorithm, the divine mathematician that that programmer encrypted this real self into your being before you even incarnate it. So you don't create the true self, you know, you uncover the true self. And that level of excavation is what our ancestors called initiation. That's what initiation really is. You know, when you look at the Akan, like I said, the Kra is your divine soul dispatch. It's a shard broken off of Elohim. It doesn't lie. It can't lie. In the Yoruba system, or Isheshe, we have the Ori Inu, which is your inner head. It's wiser than your Ori Ode. Your Ori Ode is your outer head. That's what you create your external choices through your outer head. And your Hebrew system, you had the Ruach. And the Ruach isn't just breath, but it's the encoded will, the direction that comes from the throne, right? And our Tameri systems, or our Nile Valley systems, the Ka. The Ka is the soul double that carries that eternal spark that you have. So even in your mystery schools, you had the holy guardian angel, or what they call the higher genius, you know, and that's the silent architect that they said in thelemic studies that works behind the veil. So your true self, for anyone who's like getting a little nervous, you know, like, I can't do that. Your true self was never sent to be liked. It wasn't sent to be liked. Your true self was sent to restore order, to complete contracts, and to mirror the source, to mirror the originator. And that's why the true self will always feel at odds with the world, because it refuses to pretend. It's not going to play with you. You see, your true self, it won't play a role for your comfort. The true self disrupts illusions, even when it costs you comfort. You see, it will disrupt the illusion. A lot of times people in their wickedness and in their evil, they feel, I've seen it. I've seen the look of satisfaction on their face, you know, because it feels comfortable sometimes to be evil, or to slander, or to gossip, you know, or to not take accountability for situations that you have created, or you reframe the part that you're accountable for. You know, what's the most common one that I hear all the time? Yeah, I'm accountable for allowing this person in my life to begin with. I'll take the blame for not listening to myself in the beginning. I knew what I should have did, and I didn't listen to myself. You know, those type of silly sort of statements like that. When your true self is truly awakening, you start to feel repulsed by your own performances. You know, you ever worked a job where you shucked and jive? You played you cooned in whatever form that looked like for you, but you were cooning for that position, and then you close down your computer for the night or whatever, you go outside, or you're in the parking lot, or you walking away, and you just feel like garbage. You just feel disgusted with yourself that's what you're still doing. That's because now your true self is starting to emerge. It's starting to be uncovered. So words leave your mouth and they start to feel like a betrayal. You know, you start to sense there's an ancient, older energy rising in you, and it's unignorable. But it's not loud. But it's just unignorable. So you start to lose a desire to be known, and instead you crave to be aligned. Your goals shift from praise to purpose. So the true self will never force its way to the surface. But what it will do, it will begin to dismantle anything that obscures it, and that means your image, your theology, your relationship. You see, anything that obscures your true self and your true expression is going to get it. Again, if you look at the avatar, Jake Sully's true self wasn't Navi. He was a human, right? And it was the witness, the soul that was capable of being capable of choosing alliance to the divine over being familiar. In choosing in that film, he chose Awa, and Awa was the sacred sort of intelligence of that planet Pandora. And when he did that, he shed his projections, he shed the body, he shed the lie, you know, and he remembered what his essence truly is. So you can look at it as a symbol, obviously, because there's always things to the code. But it's more than the symbol. It is the story that every soul has to remember. Like that is your almost your first initiatory law. Remember, to live as your true self, you have to violate the script that's written for your false self. You got to go off script. You have to be willing to be misunderstood. You have to be willing to walk alone. You have to be willing to lose that which is familiar, because your true self is not here on the planet or represented on the planet to be managed. Your true self is here to be obeyed. You see, so you can always ask yourself, man, are you obeying the instructions of your true self? And if you have an emotional reaction, even as you're asking the question, that's not your true self. You know, um, are you obeying the instructions of your true self, or are you negotiating them to keep the false self alive? I would be like this, but, you can't serve two masters. That's, some people understand that, one has to die. And if the one that dies is a true self, then your life becomes an echo. You become like a ghost. If the false self dies, though, for the first time, you'll begin to live. I could almost take you to a Matrix reference in that one, right? When he said, "Man, my eyes hurt," he said, "because you never used them before." When he woke him up into a more real reality. Like I said previously, you're not at war with the world. A lot of people try to make it that way. It's like make the world a scapegoat. You're at war with the version of yourself that was trained to survive inside of the world. That's what you're at war with. Like I said, trauma trained, karmic detour trained, offense trained. Every initiative begins with a division of selves. Or every single, well, it's not initiation, rather. It begins with the division of self. So our ancestors knew that. So the mystery schools that they established required it. In order to step forward, you would acknowledge that when you step forward, two voices rise up. from your stepping forward. And one voice is going to say, remain as you are. You know, it's safer that way. It's safer to remain as you are. And then the other voice is going to say, return to who you were before fear rewrote your name, you know, and that's the actual spiritual war. It's it's you versus you. You know, I almost feel like that could be a title of a movie. You know, it's you versus you. You're trained that it's the devil versus the angel, or you're trained that it's the light versus the darkness. But it's really the assigned self versus the adapted self. That's the reality of it, you know. And the truth is, the false self doesn't always feel false. Your false self feels familiar. It feels praised. It feels very functional. Whereas your true self, it doesn't always feel true. You know, it feels costly. You know, it feels silent. It feels lonely. And it feels ancient. It feels very old. And that dissonance between the selves, it's by design, you know, it's intentional. That's the friction of awakening. You know, there's always resistance before you remember. That's just how it goes. You know, so the nature of the battle, if you will, the false self is always seeking for survival. And the true self is always seeking for sovereignty. You know, so the false self avoids pain. You know, at all costs, the false self is going to avoid pain. The true self passes through pain. You see, um, the false self always wants recognition. Always. You know, the false self says, when you critique, the false self will say, so I didn't do anything right. You know, all you do is tell me everything I do wrong. You're always telling me I'm messing up. Did I not make any improvement? Did I not make? That's the false self talking. The true self desires revelation. So the true self is happy to hear the critique. Okay, I want things to be revealed. I want to understand. So the battle between the two, it intensifies not necessarily when you're weak, but the battle between the two intensifies when you're getting close to your real name. The closer you get, the more intense it gets. You see, and sometimes the more shenanigans you start to pull, you know. And there are certain markers of that in conflicts when suddenly there's a loss of interest in your own goals. You've been working at something forever. You know, some people I've seen go through that like in their last year of school, you know, higher education. And they majored in something and they were like, yeah, I'm going to do this when I graduate. This, and they get to senior year and they're like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't think I want to do that. You know, that's a part of it. You know, another marker is your intuition starts to rise louder and logic becomes more irrelevant. You know, you start having anxiety and nightmares, um, and even illnesses when you disobey your assignment. You will have illness. You know, you'll notice that certain synchronicities, they begin to increase, um, but you have a resistance to obeying them. You know, there's a strange grief that starts to come from no longer identifying with your persona, you know, as Carl Jung called it, you know, that persona, that false self. You start to feel the mourning, you feel the grief, and you start to think you're broken. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken. You're not broken. Um, what it is that you're in the final stages of an internal rebellion. That's actually what's happening. So there's a false ruler inside of you. There's a false queen inside of you, or there's a false king. And that false king or queen is being overthrown. And you're feeling the friction of that internal coup, if you will. Um, when you look at, again, Avatar, Jake Sully had to choose, either stay inside of a body that the world assigned him, or cross over fully into the vessel connected to Awa, the divine source. And the final ritual that he took, it wasn't mystical, even though it may have been displayed like that. It was initiatic, more than anything. He died in one body to live in the other body that was actually aligned with his purpose. So we all get to a point where we have to choose our vessel. Are we going to carry through the persona and the vessel of the false identity and the false self, the manufactured self, or the one that was given at the core of our assignment? One thing you could ask is like, which voice is older? Which voice inside of me is older? Which voice inside of me seeks applause? Which self is silent but unwavering? you know, um, am I loyal to my mask, or am I loyal to my mission? And to say, well, I don't know my mission, that's not an excuse. You're playing games. When people say things, well, what am I supposed to do? You tell me what I'm supposed to do. No, you're playing. You're playing. Stop being a devil. The self that you feed is always going to be the self that rules. Keep that in mind. If you feed your demon, the demon rules. Each time you betray your true self to keep the false self comfortable, you create this karmic residue, and that karmic residue, it contracts the soul, and it creates contracts that the soul now has to later clear, maybe in another life, So you cannot ascend to the higher realms of awareness while still protecting your mask. You can't have it both ways, Like I said, you got to remember, ultimately, you're the battlefield. It's you. You're the battlefield. The war is inside of you. And the world around you, that means your name, your money, your body, your relationships, all of that is just an aftershock of who you've crowned within. There's only one that can remain on the throne, and you got to decide who it's going to be. It's like when we talk about Orisha sciences, people think, well, so-and-so rules my head, this one rules my head, Obatala rules my head. You got it all twisted. You should be ruling your head. Which one is going to receive the crown? Is it you, or is it or the you the world taught you to become? Which is just another spirit entity. It's a persona. No different than maybe your misinterpretation of Orisha. To say, I see you, is not just a statement of observation. When you say, I see you, it's a summoning. It's a restoration of divine memory. Say, I see you, when you see it in the film and the Navi say it, it's not to the body, right? It's not to the persona. It's not to the role. It's not to the behavior. Most importantly, it's not to the wounds. It's a recognition of the watcher. It's that watcher inside of you that's like an eternal witness that lives behind your eyes. So the one who remembers the covenant is the one that, you want to see. We call that the Ruach, or we call that the Chi, or we call that the Kra, or we call that the I am, or the I am that which I am willing myself into being. Again, when you look at the film, the Avatar, and I haven't looked at it in a while, so I could be getting some stuff a little bit off. I probably haven't. I don't remember. It was been years since I watched that film, but some things are so very blatant. I remember, in the Avatar, Jake Sully had to die to his human form to resurrect into his divine one. So it's the same thing with us. We can remain in the shell that was built by survival, or we could cross fully into the vessel that's built by assignment, and that within itself is like spiritual physics. When you declare, I see you even to yourself, right? You begin to pierce, or you maybe not even begin, maybe you totally pierce the veil at that point, because now you're calling forth the original soul from the hidden dimension. You know, um, there's a ritual in ANU spiritual training phase 1, the mirror ritual, which a lot of people have trouble with. At classes on the Sedula House website, but some of you are very familiar. You stand before a mirror, and it's something you can do even without being a trainer. Just stand before a mirror, or sit in stillness, close your eyes, place your palm on your chest, and breathe until all of your external voices go silent. Just breathe. Then say out loud, I see you. And don't say it with judgment. Say it with authority. Don't say it as a wish. I see you, but say it as more of a declaration. And you're probably going to feel some resistance. You might feel rage. You might feel emptiness. You might feel tears coming. Let them come. What that means is that the watcher is rising up and the mask is cracking. So it's always good to understand that you're not actually seeking your true self. People say, I'm going to go find myself. You're reinstating your true self. You're recrowning the original you, the one that the Most High originator Elohim sent, not the one that the world shaped. You see, when you think about, there's a line in Jeremiah that I always appreciated, which was, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. That's Jeremiah 1:5, right? I always like that, because it tells you right there, you're not discovering yourself. You're returning to the agreement. You see, you're returning to the soul agreement that, you signed before you took your very first breath. Before you were formed and encased in flesh. In fact, before you even fell into the dimension of time, you made a contract. You are an encoded utterance of the Most High, Lord of all the universes, and you are spoken into form. So when you say, I see you, you got to remember the one who said it first, right? Eheye Asher Eheye. I am that I am, or I am that which I am becoming. And now the world just has to deal with it. You see? Let your true self come through. Let your soul glow. Feel it all so silky smooth. But just let the world have to deal with it, man. You don't have to make yourself smaller or reshape yourself for survival inside of the world. Don't let your trauma, create your form in your shape. Let your true self expression come out, and in the world, well, you have to move around with it. Move around. You don't like it, move around. Like I said, the true self never comes to be liked. It doesn't come to be liked, man. I think I've shared that before, even like when a lot of times people are like, Chief, man, they, all the praise. I listen, out of a courtesy, but it doesn't affect anything in the sense of like the praise or the critique. I'm still gonna keep doing what I'm doing. You know, sometimes, and I've learned that over the years as I've matured. Let people give the praise, because I used to I probably still do a little bit, but would like downplay a lot, or someone would go to and I'd feel uncomfortable with someone, like praising me, or it would make me maybe a little emotional, you know. Um, and I've learned that that was very selfish of me. Allow people that time to be vulnerable and to share and to say, hey, this is what you've done for me, and this is how you've changed my life. And, the work that you've done is, you know, been a blessing, right? I'm still gonna keep doing what I'm doing, because you could say all of that and I'll turn right around and still give you a critique. So the praise doesn't shut me up. I've never been a person who responded to flattery or anything like that. I don't like it. You know, um, I'm going to do whatever the creator told me to do. And you might not like it. And I'm not going to care whether you like it or not. I'm not going to care whether you want it or not. As long as I'm in alignment, that's all I care about. Right. So that's a place to be. And everyone can deal with it, or they can move around with it. They can get out the way, whatever, you know. Um, the more you start to extend yourself into your true and actual self, the more people around you, and especially those they have really elaborate masks. Some people have better masks than others, right? I have masks. I definitely have masks. I work in a lot of different spaces, from nonprofit spaces to corporate spaces, to government spaces. Sometimes I find myself in when I'm helping people. And there's different masks that I wear for each environment based on, what it is that I'm looking to accomplish. But my masks are not very, they're not elaborate. I got the cheap clearance fire sale Party City mask, with a little piece of elastic on the back of it that be like hurting your ear. My masks are cheap, you know. Um, they're very easy to get through. I don't build elaborate masks, you know, because I am not really trying to hide too much, because then you got to keep the mask up. That's work, and you'll find a lot of times when you see people without their mask, that's when they go crazy on you. It's like seeing your neighbor one day. You go over and she doesn't have her waist trainer on, or her wig on, and you see like, oh, you got a head full of gray hair, or you're bald, and now she doesn't feel comfortable around you. Maybe she even starts to resent you because you saw the true self, the true person. You know, there's a lot of people who keep a mask in your face and smile in your face and talk behind your back, backstabbers. you know, um, that's a person who is creating so much karmic residue because they've crowned the false self. And the more you crown and allow your true self to come through, the more people will most likely dislike you and use you as a scapegoat for their level of falsity. But there's one thing always to remember about the scapegoat. I said this to someone recently, because I have been the scapegoat for many, 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 many years, especially in the work that I do. People come in all sorts of messed up. You help them, you do all kind of work with them for free, work that other people would charge them tens of thousands of dollars for. You do it for free. And when they get to a certain point, when they want their mask back because it's so uncomfortable, they reframe everything you did for them. All of the help now becomes control. See, remember when I talked about how the serpent spoke in the garden? Oh, he's just doing that because of this. He's just telling you don't eat it because he doesn't want you to do it. So they'll start to have that conversation. He's just helping me because he's just showing this much patience because, he's just telling me that that's not a good idea, or don't do that because he wants to control me. You'll start to reframe things until eventually you'll hear something that, because you're looking for that thing that you can hear that will reinforce the mass. And that's probably me saying something harsh to you. Like, I remember someone said that to me once about me. Oh, you seem like you want to control people. And I said to the person, I said, if I did want to control, I said, first of all, that's too much work. I'm not trying to have a slave. Even in the BDSM world, I don't necessarily want a slave. Even in that format, I don't want a slave. It's too much work. I've seen slave master relationships in the kink community. I don't have, man, I got too much stuff going on, man. I got businesses across the sea, international businesses, international foundations, multiple wives. I'm just using the term wives. I don't use the term wives, but I got all these children that are looking for me for support and for help. I got a whole community. I ain't got time to be controlling. Like, come on, man, that takes too much damn time. And I've had people who gotten upset with me because I wouldn't have that relationship with them so that they could relinquish accountability. You see, so what ends up happening is that they turn on you, once you push either accountability or you just stay within your true self. It's not a likable space. But like I said, I had people say that to me. And it's like, if I wanted to control somebody, it's going to be somebody better than you. Like, come on, man, get out of here. Like, if I'm a pretty together guy, I can get up into rooms that most people can't. If I want to control somebody, I'm going to control somebody who's got some power. I ain't going to control your little punk behind and you ain't even making 6 figures a year. Or if you are, you barely scratching over 6 figures. You ain't got no real power. You might come from a raggedy family. You ain't even got no real connections, nothing like that. You can't push me up through the ranks of society. Why would I want to control you? What's the point in doing that? I've had people say that to me who have absolutely nothing going for themselves. But you want to be kind. You don't want to say, like, look, I'm helping you. Like, don't get it twisted. But then when you pull back the help because they say stupid things like that, that's when the demon goes berserk, because the meal is gone now. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I was eating Chief's voice and his aura and his smell and this and that. I was eating that and now it's gone. I'm going crazy. And they look for a meal elsewhere. You see? So when you feed the true self, you don't have to go through all that nonsense. The false self is always hungry. It's empty. It's always hungry. And it has to feed on what it came from. It came from the world. So it's going to always feed on the world. The strife, the misery, the offense, the revelry, even, the debauchery. It's going to always feed on that. The true self isn't hungry. The true self is connected to abundance. So the true self causes you to strip more things away from your life that you didn't think you would be stripping away. You see? And now what happens is the more you strip away, if you can hold on to that, to those final stages, you come through like, man, I don't even want all this stuff. I don't even want to do all this, man. I'm going to go get me a $15 an hour job working at, some retail store or some whatever, and rent me a room somewhere. That's fine. I just want peace, But the false self says, are you crazy? Nah, you don't want that. You want this and you want that. And you want to be gripping on wood grain and sitting on leather and farting through silk. That's the false self. False self, it tricks you into those sort of things, into those sort of experiences. You don't want to be sitting somewhere eating grits on a Ritz. You want to be eating steak and things. You don't know what it's going to look like when the true self comes to, but I tell you, it's a glorious experience, because now you're moving through the world as the God you were designed to move through the world as opposed to being a servant to the emotional reactions and the demonology of the world. Pay attention to who you counsel with. Are they interested in pulling forth, educating and pulling forth your true self? Or are they only interested in reinforcing the false self through offense and misery and slander and gossip and backbiting and complaining and scheming and killing and stealing and destroying. You see, you can easily pick it up. I'm telling you, use the guide I just gave you. All right. With that, I want to thank you for this time that we were able to spend together. Thank you so much. Be sure to make sure you subscribe to all of our ANU Life Global social media outlets. You subscribe to the newsletter. You read in the newsletter. Participate in jumping in. For those, and I see we have some new people who signed up to be a part of the community, man, and be a part of this movement. Best of fortune with you. Let's see how it goes. You got to go through your interview and share who you are, why you want to be here. Like in any tribal space, you're always brought before the elders and they say, what is your mission? What is it? What is your intention? What are your intentions here? So best of fortune with you on coming in. And for those of you who are considering, come on in, as we go into this season soon of reflection, where things are cooling down, it gives us an opportunity to really woodshed and workshop our concepts and ideas. So we will emerge from next spring even more powerful, even more true to our actual selves, and not just aligned with our emotions and our ego and our immature, undeveloped self. All right. Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much. Peace.